She was still holding a paper bag of takeout when the door opened and her husband told her, in front of his whole family, that she no longer belonged there. His mother stood behind him, arms crossed, wearing the expression of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her head for years. His younger sister held up her phone, filming. And in the hallway, in a green dress that fit like it had been chosen for exactly this night, stood the woman he planned to marry next. They told her she had brought nothing into that house. Nothing into that family. Nothing worth keeping. What none of them knew was that 10 days earlier, a lawyer in a downtown office had been trying to reach her, holding documents that would make every word spoken that night sound very, very small. By morning she would have no home. By the end of the month she would have more than all of them combined. Grace Whitfield noticed something was wrong the moment she pulled into the driveway. The Ashworth house was too bright for a Tuesday. Cars lined the curb. Music leaked through the windows. Shadows moved behind the curtains like a party already in motion. She checked the clock on her dashboard. 8:24 p.m. late again. The ICU at Mercy General had been short-staffed, and a teenage boy in respiratory distress had needed someone to sit with him until his oxygen stabilized. Grace had stayed because staying was what she did. She had spent 6 years as a nurse learning that the job never ended exactly on schedule, and 4 years married into the Ashworth family learning that this was never going to be forgiven. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her scrubs were wrinkled. Her eyes were tired in the particular way that comes from 12-hour shifts and years of trying to prove she belonged somewhere she was never fully welcomed. She grabbed the paper bag of soup and bread from the passenger seat and walked toward the front door. The laughter inside quieted the second she stepped through it. Every head turned. Every conversation paused. And in that silence, Grace understood this wasn't dinner. It was staged. Her husband, Marcus, stood in the center of the living room in a gray suit, though he'd told her that morning he was too tired to go anywhere. He didn't move toward her. He didn't smile. To his right stood his mother, Diane, in a burgundy dress, chin lifted in the way that always made Grace feel like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. To his left, his sister Bree sat with her phone raised, already recording. And near the staircase stood Vanessa, one hand resting on the banister as if she already lived there. Grace had seen her twice before, once at a company dinner, once riding in the front seat of Marcus's car when he'd said he was only giving a coworker a lift. Vanessa gave her a small, careful smile. The kind one woman gives another when she already knows how the night ends. Grace set the bag down slowly. Nobody told me we were having company. Marcus finally looked at her. Not with warmth. Not even discomfort. With relief. The relief of a man who'd decided it was easier to be blunt than to be honest with himself. We needed everyone here, he said. This concerns the family. Family. The word sounded foreign coming from him. Diane stepped forward first. Well, at least you made it. We were starting to think the hospital mattered more than your marriage. Again. There was an emergency, Grace said evenly. There's always an emergency, Bree muttered, not lowering her voice. Grace turned back to Marcus. What is this? Instead of answering, he reached for Vanessa's hand. Not quietly. Not with hesitation. In front of everyone. The room watched Grace the way people watch the first crack of thunder before a storm. This is over, Marcus said. The words hung there like they hadn't decided where to land. We've been unhappy a long time, he continued. We both know this hasn't worked. We both know. Grace repeated. Diane laughed softly. Let's not pretend this is a surprise, dear. Grace turned to her. For 4 years, this woman had corrected the way she spoke, the way she dressed, the way she held a fork at dinner. She'd once told Grace, smiling in front of guests, that kindness was lovely but breeding was permanent. Another time she'd said nurses were admirable people, just not the kind old money families usually married. Grace had swallowed all of it because she loved Marcus. Or she had loved the man she once believed him to be. You brought her here, Grace said. Into our house? Our house? Bree repeated with a small laugh. That's generous. Marcus rubbed his jaw. Let's do this like adults. Like adults? Her voice cracked for the first time. You planned this with your mother, your sister, and another woman, and now you want dignity? Watch your tone, Diane snapped. No, Grace said, turning to her. Not tonight. Something flickered across the older woman's face, surprise maybe, but it disappeared fast. Then Marcus said the sentence that split the room in two. You need to pack your things and go. For a moment, Grace just stared at him. She thought of the years she'd covered half the bills before he told her it was beneath the family to keep splitting expenses like roommates. She thought of the nights she'd come home with swollen feet and still cooked, because his mother said no real wife let her husband go hungry. She thought of the miscarriage he'd never once brought up again, as if pretending it away made the grief disappear too. And now he was telling her to leave, like her time had simply run out. "I'm your wife," she whispered. His eyes went flat. "Not for much longer." Diane lifted a folder from the console table and opened it with precision, pulling out bank statements, printed emails, photographs. "We've reviewed everything," she said. "The spending. The missed events. The way you've lived in this family while giving back something quite different from what we hoped for." "Equal value," Grace repeated, disbelieving. "Yes," Diane said calmly. "Status. Presence. Stability. Marcus needs someone who complements his life, not someone who vanishes into a hospital and comes home looking wrecked." Grace laughed once hollow. "I save lives." "And yet," Vanessa said softly, "that path may not fit the life he's building." Marcus said nothing. That silence hurt more than anything else in the room. "You planned this," Grace said again. He looked away. That was answer enough. Diane closed the folder. "Pack what's yours. The rest stays." Grace's throat tightened. "You cannot be serious." Marcus's father, Walter, who'd been quiet by the window, finally spoke. "This family has been through enough. Leave with some dignity while you still can." Dignity. They had staged her humiliation and were still using that word. Grace scanned the room, hoping for one softened face. It never came. Bree lifted her phone higher. "Should I get the gate too?" Grace turned and walked upstairs before anyone could see her hands shaking. The bedroom no longer felt like hers. She pulled a suitcase from the closet. Her scrubs, 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a photo from nursing school, a small carved box holding a gold locket her mother had given her. Her mother, Ruth, had pressed it into her palm on her 21st birthday and said, "No matter how dim they make the room, don't forget the light you carry." Ruth had passed 3 months earlier, after a short fight with heart failure. The grief had swallowed everything: appetite, memory, thought. Grace had moved through the funeral underwater, hearing voices without absorbing a single word. There had been calls afterward. Unfamiliar numbers. One voicemail from a law office she never returned, because that same week Marcus had told her she needed time to grieve without distractions. She had let it go and then forgotten it entirely. Downstairs the laughter started again. Her marriage was ending below her like a party continuing without her. She zipped the suitcase. When she tried to lift it, Bree appeared in the doorway with 2 garbage bags and dropped them on the bed. "You should use these instead," she said. "The suitcase is Marcus's." Grace stared at her. Bree shrugged. "What? I'm just being practical." In that moment, Grace understood something clearly. Cruelty felt ordinary to this family because none of them had ever had to carry its weight. Not yet. She emptied the suitcase and refilled the bags. By the time she came downstairs, the music had stopped. They waited in the foyer like a small tribunal. Marcus didn't touch her bags. His father opened the front door. Rain had started outside, tapping the driveway, darkening the porch. Diane stepped aside. "Go." Grace looked at Marcus one last time. "After everything, this is how you wanted to do it?" He held Vanessa's hand tighter. "It's done," he said. "Not I'm sorry. Not you didn't deserve this. Just, it's done." She stepped into the rain. The door shut behind her. She heard the deadbolt slide into place, a sound that would echo in her memory for months. 10 days later she was sleeping in her car behind a closed grocery store, washing up in gas station restrooms before early shifts, eating what little she could afford. She called Marcus 3 times. Blocked. She called once from a different number. Diane answered. "You should have left quietly when you had the chance," she said and hung up. 2 days after that, her hospital administrator asked her into his office. He couldn't quite meet her eyes. "There's been pressure," he said. "Complaints? Influential people. They're concerned your personal situation is affecting your work." Distance. That was the word powerful people used when they wanted someone pushed aside without saying why. By noon she'd resigned. The gossip sites picked up the story that same week. Not her side, never her side. A respected businessman, recently separated, was moving forward with a sophisticated new partner. The photos were flattering. The narrative was clean and false. Grace saw it on her phone in a waiting room, there for dizziness brought on by stress and too little food. An older nurse behind the desk studied her twice before approaching. "Your face," she said gently. "Are you Ruth's daughter?" Grace looked up, startled. "I worked with your mother years ago," the woman said. "You have her eyes." That was all it took. The tears came before Grace could stop them. The nurse, whose badge read Matron Powell, brought her into a side room and let her cry without interruption. When Grace finally told her everything, the older woman listened without judgment, then said, "Your mother was never careless. If she mentioned a lawyer, it mattered." A name surfaced in Grace's memory like a struck match, the voicemail she deleted in a taxi after the funeral. A law office. She found it that afternoon at a library computer. Whitfield notice from a firm called Harman & Cole, Estate and Asset Advisory. She called with shaking hands. The receptionist's voice changed the moment Grace gave her name. "We've been trying to reach you for weeks. Mr. Harman asked that you come in as soon as possible. Tomorrow 10 o'clock? The office sat on the top floor of a glass tower downtown, all quiet carpet and clean light. Grace almost turned back at the entrance in her worn shoes and faded blouse. But the receptionist greeted her by name, and a silver-haired man rose to meet her. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your mother was one of the most disciplined people I've ever worked with." He opened a file. "Your grandfather quietly bought land decades ago near what later became a major logistics corridor. Most of the family sold early. You didn't? It passed to your mother. She held it, reinvested every return, and kept it under careful structures for years." He slid documents across the desk, valuations, trust papers, lease returns. Grace looked at them without comprehension. 6 years ago, part of the land was purchased by a national developer. Your mother placed the proceeds into long-term holdings, private equity, infrastructure, healthcare investment. She also held income property in 3 states. "How much?" Grace whispered. He didn't dramatize it. He simply turned the last page. Total estate value, $180,400,000, with additional annual income near $6.8 million. Grace stared. Her first feeling wasn't joy. It was disbelief. "My mother wore the same coat for 10 years. Because she wanted you to understand who you were before you understood what you had," he said. "She believed money in the wrong season shapes a person badly. She chose to wait." He handed her an envelope in her mother's handwriting. Inside a letter. "My dearest Grace, if this has reached you, I've gone somewhere I can only follow you with prayers, not hands. Forgive me for waiting. I wanted your confidence built from your own work, not my provision. What I leave you is large, but it isn't the greatest thing I gave you. The greatest thing is the truth that you were never small, no matter who tried to convince you otherwise. Protect yourself first. Then protect others. Build something that carries light and never stay anywhere love has already left. You were enough before this. You will be enough after it. Love, Mama." Grace pressed the letter to her chest and wept, not delicate tears but the deep, clearing kind. Not only for the money, but because even in her final days, her mother had seen exactly where Grace was heading and had tried to place a shield in her hands. Over the following weeks, Grace rebuilt quietly. A financial advisor, a therapist, a property manager, and a sharp, steady assistant named Priya who knew when to speak and when to simply pour the tea. Grace bought a modest apartment with a water view, not loud, just peaceful, and began deciding what came next. Not revenge for its own sake, but truth standing where silence had once been forced. Weeks later, the Ashworth family's annual charity gala filled the grand ballroom downtown, the kind of event where power wore cologne and reputation dressed up as generosity. Marcus and Vanessa were expected to attend as the city's newest golden couple. 2 nights before, an anonymous major donation registered under a private office. No one thought much of it. On the night itself, Grace walked in wearing a simple black dress that made everyone else look overdressed. Her mother's locket caught the light at her throat. She wasn't trying to look wealthy. She was simply standing fully in herself and the room felt it. Marcus turned first. The color left his face. Vanessa's smile faltered. Diane took a visible step back. The host tapped the microphone. "Before dinner we have a special announcement. A new philanthropic partner has made one of the largest private gifts in this foundation's history. Please welcome Grace Whitfield, founder of the Ruth's Light Initiative." The applause shifted from polite to genuinely curious. Grace stepped onto the stage and looked out, not at Marcus first but at the room, the cameras, the quiet women at the back tables. 3 months ago I buried my mother," she said, her voice steady. 2 months ago I left my marriage with 2 garbage bags in the rain. I thought I'd lost everything a person could lose in one season. The room went truly silent. But grief has a way of revealing what hard moments try to hide. My mother spent years building something not just for me but for impact. Tonight, in her honor, the Ruth's Light Initiative is committing $35 million to women's shelters, nursing scholarships and emergency legal aid for women in difficult transitions. The room rose to its feet. At the Ashworth table no one moved. Afterward, Marcus caught her near a side hallway. "I didn't know," he said. "If I had." "That," she said quietly, "is exactly the point." Diane approached with practiced warmth. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding, dear. Families go through strain. Surely this doesn't need to be public." "You closed the door while I stood in the rain," Grace said. "It was a difficult evening," Diane said. "No," Grace replied. "It was a revealing one." An assistant from Harmon and Cole arrived with an envelope. Grace handed it to Marcus. "Divorce papers," she said. "Already filed." She looked at him once more, and when she spoke there was no anger in it, which made it land harder. "Keep the house if you can still afford it. But you'll never again have access to me, my peace, or anything built from my mother's name." Then she walked back into the ballroom, into applause, into a future that finally belonged entirely to her. What followed wasn't magic. It was simply consequence. Investors grew cautious around Marcus, not out of judgment, but because he'd misread the moment, and in that world that mattered. A development deal paused. Vanessa left within 3 weeks, moving on with the efficiency of someone catching a different flight. Diane called 4 times in 1 week. Grace answered none of them. Walter came in person once and waited 40 minutes before Priya delivered the message, "Ms. Whitfield wishes your family peace." From a distance. He left without argument. The divorce finalized 6 months later, clean, final, complete. Without her steadiness behind him, and with debts he'd hidden even from his own family, Marcus eventually lost the house. Grace built. The Ruth's Light Initiative opened 2 shelters within a year, funded legal aid, launched nursing scholarships for girls from low-income families. She visited the sites often, not with cameras but with notebooks and the same instinct that once kept her at a hospital bed past her shift. One afternoon she stopped at her mother's grave. "I understand now," she whispered, touching the locket. "Not all inheritance is money. Some of it is courage." Months later, leaving a courthouse after funding a legal aid case, she noticed a young woman on the steps, tired, gripping a worn bag while a man nearby said, "You're nothing without me." Grace recognized the sentence. She'd nearly believed it once herself. She sat beside the woman, offered water and a card. "Who are you?" the woman asked. Grace smiled. "Someone who learned that people only get to decide your worth if you hand them the pen." She stood, adjusted her coat, and walked toward the car where Priya held the door open. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Because the real victory was never the headline. It was the life built afterward, the peace no argument could touch, the quiet becoming so complete that the people from her past could only watch from a distance. What would you have done in her place? Walked away in silence or built something they could never take from you? If this story moved you, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like Grace's.